The Further Education of OverSoul 7 by Gene Roberts. Read by Martin John. Jeffrey's Closing Notes. It is with mixed feelings of exhaustion, triumph, and misgivings that I close this manuscript with these few notes. Anyone who reads this book can easily trace the development of my own involvement until I, myself, become a character in its bizarre narrative. For me now, the division between reality and fantasy exists no longer. That is, I realize that to some extent each of us deals with varying kinds of reality. Perhaps each of us also has a younger, unresolved self wandering the wild reaches of the psyche. But in any case, and despite the oddness of therapeutic measures, I feel whole for the first time in many years. This doesn't mean that I have accepted OverSoul 7 as my psychological guide per se, but I do believe that he represents those more creative and expansive aspects of the psyche that most of us ignore. Would that ever-enthusiastic, imaginative portion of the psyche then take such steps as this automatic manuscript to bring itself to conscious awareness? In my case, at least, the answer must be yes. Moreover, there can be no doubt of the devotion that such a mission implies, as this usually unconscious level of the self surfaces, and acts as a teacher for the conscious mind. There are still many unresolved questions, some mundane and some quite mysterious. What will I do now? I have no idea, except that I'll no longer stay in the confines of my academic field, but roam more adventurously elsewhere into other investigations that I hope will please the curious Will, who still wonders about the meaning of existence. I was astonished at OverSoul 7's announcement of a little book for Tweety. For God's sake, I thought, the book is writing a book! Without explaining its origin, though, I intend to send it to Sarah for her child. She delivered a son about the same time Tweety was born, and to read it as well to any possible children of my own. The simplicity of the material is most deceptive, and had I to read such prose as a boy, perhaps Will would have found more joy in life, and we would not have needed to stand on the precept of psychological duplicity contemplating a double suicide. For it now comes to me clearly that any suicide involves the death of thousands, those born or unborn, the slaying of probable selves who might have sprung otherwise from the points of our lives. And even if we continue to exist, we would have altered our own relationship with ourselves, perhaps. Who knows? Becoming probable versions actualized in other worlds other than those we know. Obviously, I'd become a stranger to myself before this manuscript began. I isolated my younger questioning self, buried the questions, for that matter, denied the dissatisfaction that was meant to lead to creative solutions, If I had not saved Will in my past, would I have committed suicide in my present? Wouldn't that present have existed to begin with, since, as Will, I would have died years ago? Or because my present did exist, was it a foregone conclusion that Will wouldn't commit suicide? I don't believe so. I think that I had gone as far as I could in time without Will, though, and that he was so despondent, not only because of the problems that existed in the past, but also because I'd kept him apart in a psychological limbo that lacked all give and take or chance for fulfillment. So for him, time had stopped then. And when I went back to save him, started time up again, which meant that he had to jump or not jump. As I read Seven's little book, I could feel Will reading it too, and I felt as if a new memory for both of us were being formed. A memory of having read the same material somewhere as a child. And in the strangest fashion, as I read of Seven's nightly book sessions with Tweety, I saw my own childhood bedroom transposed in my mind's eye over Tweety's. And OverSoul 7 was reading to me as well. Embarrassing confusion. But as I typed the material of the little book, a part of my mind went open and transparent, childlike, and was refreshed. The little book is being included in full, rather as an appendix to this manuscript, as Cypress suggested to Seven in the last chapter. Yet the little book is more than an appendix by far. And if there are mathematical and scientific formulas, perhaps there are psychological or psychic ones as well. If so, then Seven's little book presents one such formula by which life can be experienced more fully. Before I begin these adventures, I would have been appalled by such a statement, of course. About Lydia, who always remained a character in a book to me, I'm less sure, except that I began to realize, long before the manuscript itself told me, that her pilgrimage was for me also, and, of course, for Will, who visited the Virgin, and in that ludicrous scene before the nightmare sequence that I so frighteningly shared. I felt, without wanting to admit it, that Lydia's dilemma to be born or not born paralleled my own psychological state, even when I hid my depression from myself. So, in a most unobjective fashion, I feel that in this case at least, fictional characters and real ones help each other, interact it, and form some kind of interdimensional series of events almost impossible to describe. I must state my belief that Cypress and OverSoul 7 are real, then. Fictionally real, and their reality may straddle such simple definitions. Ram the Godologist presents a problem. I have no idea if he is an independent personality of some kind, purely a fictional character, or a composite. He could somehow represent the futility of applying Freudian principles to religion, for example, or he could symbolize a portion of Ram's Braille's deep distrust of religion and certain tenets of ecology as well. I personally found the material on the gods fascinating, simply because it brought home some vital issues. To search for the gods in conventional terms is a useless pursuit, for most often our vision of the gods all but disappears in our ideas of what they must be, or what they must be like. The strange production of this book itself gives me a nebulous, quote, feel for the kind of creativity that any divinity must possess, a vast gestalt of being that could scarcely be contained in any of our conventional godly tales. I see now that in the past I equated God with the images organized religion had of Him, and recognized their spiritual poverty. I cast out all thoughts of divinity altogether. Evolution's, quote, chance universe was no solution to the origin of life either, however, though I trusted that more than a capricious God. But many questions concerning the existence of divinity still remain. The most difficult and still unresolved question remaining regards the status of Ram, who I assure you is a very real person with a traceable history. The interview, as recorded in chapter 28, was the last one we had. I never saw him again, and he left no forwarding address. By all reasons of logic, Ram cannot be a future self of mine, since his history exists in my present and well into the past. So, in those terms, I can't grow into who he is. Yet, I am certain that Ram is a different person now than he was before these adventures began. As I am, of course. It wouldn't surprise me to find myself in my future growing into the kind of man he would be, had he, in his younger years, written this automatic manuscript instead of me. As to whether or not Cypress and OverSoul 7 are independent entities or personifications arising from highly creative elements of my own psyche, I have no answer. It's possible, I suppose, that some unforeseen future events might shed light on that basic question. Perhaps I will be suddenly urged once again to write down words not my own, producing a script that lives now only in probability. Or perhaps this book was a one-time boost, arising in response to my problems, in which case I suppose I shall never feel that bizarre and fascinating rush of creativity again. Or perhaps in a few months I may look back and find the entire episode unbelievable. If so, I shall be far poorer than I am now. The patients in the mental institution were quite real, of course. I personally met Queen Alice and the girl who thought she was Christ. It wouldn't surprise me terribly if in the future some odd manuscript of Queen Alice's came to light, perhaps prepared with Ram's assistance. So this manuscript raises more questions than it answers, which is really the whole point of it, I imagine. Most certainly, I will live the rest of my life examining reality in the light of what is written here. End. Peace, light, and love. Aloha. This is the last part before the little book. It's the epilogue. 7 said, confused, I do understand that Jeffrey did write the book, but from another perspective, you and I both know that Jeffrey's a character in a book, too. Precisely, Cypress answered. Seven was quiet for a moment, pondering. He really didn't want to say what was on his mind, but Cypress said, "And?" "Well," Oversoul 7 said, "what bothers me is this. We both know that from still another perspective, we're characters in a book, too." "Precisely," Cypress answered, smiling. "But we know that we exist," shouted 7. He was beyond exasperation. "Then what are you so concerned about?" Cypress asked. "We created the book that we're in, we created ourselves, and a dazzling reality that does exist. We create the physical world in which the books have meaning." And 7 cried, "I'll never get to OverSoul 8 stage if I have to understand that first." End. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.